to the Russell Scott Show.
Jim Marrs, welcome to the program.
Russell, it's a delight to be with you.
Jim Marrs is a New York Times best-selling author of several books on a wide range of topics which include 9/11 Truth, Telepathy, Secret Societies, JFK Assassination. His latest book, which I have not yet read, is Our Occulted History. Do the Global Elite Conceal Ancient Aliens? There's a lot going on in that title, Jim. Occultism, global elite, ancient aliens. So I'd like to deconstruct it if we can.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, when I think of the occult, I think Aleister Crowley. I don't think government.
Right. Well, first off, let's get our terms defined here. I use the term occult, and I can assure you that this book is not about witches or devil worship or vampires and what we normally think of the occult. This is used in the astronomical sense. When the moon eclipses the sun, that's called an occultation. And it simply means that it hides the sun. So our occulted history simply means our hidden history. Although I use the term occulted advisedly because there is an unearthly aspect to the whole thing. And that gets us into the compelling, if not overwhelming, evidence of extraterrestrial visitation on the Earth in our very, very distant past. And so that's what we've got here, is combining these two topics, which heretofore I don't believe most people thought were connected. One being the New World Order, which is the demonstrable fact that there is a handful of very rich, powerful people, mostly bankers, who are trying to control the world through the world economies. We see this taking place in Cyprus with the European Union and with our own economic struggles. And then combining that with a growing popularity of a topic that has been pushed along by that TV series about ancient aliens or ancient astronauts. My hypothesis was, is there a connection? Can we connect the two? And yes, we can. In fact, it goes back to certain families and certain bloodlines that can be tracked all the way back through our written history and beyond.
So who are these global elite?
Well, you have a whole phalanx of managers and administrators whose names would not necessarily mean anything to the public, and they are not necessarily bad people or anything. They, most presidents of corporations, for example, are very able and probably Harvard-educated administrators. What we're talking about is the people that actually own controlling stock in these corporations and their centralized control. For example, in 2011, there was a study by the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology, and they found that out of 43 multinational corporations, they were controlled by a little over 1,000 companies with interlocking ownership. And these 1,000 companies were then controlled by 147 interlocking firms, of which about 20 firms, mostly banks, controlled that. And collectively, because of these interlocking ownerships and directorships, they controlled about 80% of global revenues, which is really incredible. This is incredible, tight, centralized control. And this study, they pointed out, did not even analyze family, social, or relationships of the owners and stockholders. For example, when the former head of CIA, Bill Casey, controlled a company called Capital Cities Communications, and they bought ABC television because ABC was airing stories that were not very complimentary to the CIA. So Bill Casey just bought ABC, and that was the end of those stories. And the way he was able to control it was because when they announced the sale, they said, well, Bill Casey only owns 6% of the stock, which doesn't sound like much. But then it also said his wife owned a like amount. Well, that means 12%, and nobody owned more than 6%. And so therefore, Bill Casey controlled the company. That's how it works. Anybody in big business knows this, but most of the time we don't realize, how you can own a small percentage of stock in a large corporation and still control that corporation if you own more than anyone else.
And we're seeing that there's a different set of laws for these globalist corporations.
Right. If you and I defrauded the public to the tune of millions of dollars, even trillions of dollars, we'd be in the stocks. We'd be in jail. We'd certainly be before a judge. But then you go back to 2008 and watch the debacle that has overcome the U.S. economy, largely due to fraudulent, illegal, unethical banking practices such as the housing bubble and the derivatives market. And I simply ask you, who's gone to jail? Who's gone before a judge? Who's even been demoted? And the answer is no one, unless you want to count Bernie Madoff, and that doesn't really count because he was only ripping off the rip-off artist.
The patsy.
He was a patsy. He was the one guy who went to jail because he was defrauding some of the very people that were defrauding the public.
Well, I was going to cite the Monsanto Protection Act that was just signed by the great Obama.
Oh, my God. I know. How in the world does that get through, you know?
There's no public debate, no forum.
Yeah, I'm not even fired up for their stupid GMO stuff that nobody even knows what that's going to do to us or the environment or the food chain. But, you know, it's even worse when now they say we don't have to tell you what we got in there or what it's doing to you. How did that get passed in a free country? I don't get it.
I think it's pretty obvious that the corporations own the government or the military.
Exactly. And that goes back to the late 1800s when the Supreme Court ruled that a corporation counts as an individual, okay? And here recently they've ruled that since they're an individual, they can then contribute to a political candidate, just like you and I can contribute money to a political candidate, which now has codified what has been in operation for years, which is they just buy up and control Congress. You know, it's the Congress. Most congressmen no longer listen to their constituency; they listen to the people that give them money,
or have any time to read the bills.
Oh, they can't even read it. I know. The Patriot Act is a case in point. According to Ron Paul, they got it the night before, and it's thousands of pages. Nobody had time or inclination to even read the whole thing. Mm-hmm. Or as Nancy Pelosi said with the Obama health care bill, well, let's pass it so we can find out what's in it. What kind of insanity is that?
Did you hear about Alan Greenspan talking about the Federal Reserve is no longer needed? And it seems like it's in plain sight. Why hide it? It's
yeah.
It's one and the same organization. Let's just make it one supranational corporation.
Well, here's the thing. Being a student of history, I realized that one of the biggest bones of contention among our founding fathers was whether or not to have a central bank. Alexander Hamilton, of course, a rich guy who was representing his rich friends, said we really needed a central bank. But Thomas Jefferson, Franklin, and others said, hey, look what the central banks have done to Europe and just caused misery and poverty and war. We don't want a central bank. And they argued about it all through our history. And they tried a couple, the old Bank of the United States and the Bank of America. And each time he gained control and went and became corrupt, and they finally did away with them by the time of Andrew Jackson. And all through the 1800s, when America prospered and grew so mightily, we did not have a central bank until 1913, when a bunch of bankers conspired, and I use that term because they themselves used it. They said we were conspirators. And they met on Jekyll Island off the coast of Georgia, which was the J.P. Morgan hunting lodge, and they concocted the Federal Reserve System, okay? And all through my lifetime, it was never referred to as the central bank. In fact, I can recall being called down on that as a reporter early on. We don't call it a central bank, okay, because the older folks understood what that meant, and they didn't want it to be a central bank, okay? And then all of a sudden, about 15 years ago or 20, all of a sudden on the news, it was the central bank today announced, and all of a sudden just overnight with no vote and no change of anything, it became a central bank, and that's exactly what it is. Even though there's 12 member banks, they all take their lead from the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and that's under very tight control of these international bankers. because all of those banks are owned by other banks, which are then in turn owned by private investors, many of which are not even Americans. And this is why our economy is in a shambles.
And these are the New World Order, these people?
That's the New World Order. Yep. And anyone who does not knuckle under and does not want a central bank that's connected to the Exchange Stabilization Fund, a little-known agency that is now stabilizing, standardizing the banking practices of the international banking elite, becomes a nation in the axis of evil. Mm-hmm. Syria, Iran, Libya. North Korea, any country, Libya. Okay, Gaddafi was a tin-horn dictator, but he was their tin-horn dictator, and in many ways was doing some pretty good things for Libya, but he wasn't creating a central bank, and worse than that, he was talking about creating a monetary unit, I think they're going to call it the dinar, based on gold, which would have undercut the U.S. dollar. So what happens? Oh, well, he's a bad guy, and we bomb the hell out of him and wreck his country, okay?
Yeah, it's fairly easy to predict what the next war will be because you just have to look at what countries don't have the central banking system in place.
Exactly. And that's why Iran's the big enemy right now. Right. And it used to be Russia because, see, during the time of the czars and the time of the communists, they understood the power and central control of a central bank, and so they didn't have one. But after communism fell, the first thing that happened is that the bankers went into Russia and said, okay, we'll help you reconstitute your economy here, but the first thing you have to do is create a central bank, and they did. And so now that's just part of this whole banking system, which is based not on money, as most people would think, but based on debt, self-created, self-generating debt. And most people don't even realize that throughout history, certainly back in early days of history, both the Muslims and the Christians considered charging interest on a loan usury, and that was sinful. You weren't supposed to do that. Isn't that interesting? And now I can remember through my lifetime when in Texas, according to the state constitution, anything over 6% interest on a loan was considered usury and was against the law. And then all of a sudden, as the banks gained more and more control over government, that began to rise. Went to 8%, then went to 10%, then went to 12%, and finally got up to about 16%. And I know most people now are probably being charged 22, 25% on their credit cards. And at that point, they just said the Texas legislators threw up their hands and said, "Oh well," and they did away with the whole constitutional.
We're charged interest on our taxes.
Exactly.
I don't know how it works in the States, but here in Canada, if you don't pay your taxes on time, you pay credit card interest rates.
That's kind of cruel and unusual punishment, isn't it?
It's usury, for sure.
It is. It definitely is.
What do you make of the great Obama? I know one of your books...
Don't get me started. Oh, man. First off, Russell, the problem is, if I say anything negative about Obama, then people automatically whiplash and say, oh, well, he must be for the Bushes and for the Republicans.
Right.
No. If you'll go back, you'll find that I was bad-mouthing them, too, because the Republicans and the Democrats are simply two sides of the same coin, and they're controlled by the same people, okay? In fact, the very same people who supported Bush and the corporations and Goldman Sachs and the big banks that supported Bush turned around and supported Obama. They're controlled by the same. It's like a well-known lobbyist in Washington, George Green, once said when he was trying to recruit a finance director for Jimmy Carter, and this finance director said, well, wait a minute, Carter's a Democrat and I'm a Republican. Why are you trying to get me to raise money for a Democrat? According to a former head of the Federal Reserve System, he was told, don't worry about it, we control them both. That's the way it is. That's the truth of the matter. So people that get diverted off into party politics they're just off in the diversion. They do not understand what's truly going on, and that's why it just continues.
Divide and conquer.
Divide and conquer. It's the oldest tactic in the world, and it still is working. Look at us today. In World War II, when we had some true foreign enemies, I mean, the German Nazis did want to come and invade America. The fact they were building a 3-stage rocket that they call the New York rocket pretty well, and it shows what their intentions were. And the same thing with the Japanese imperialists. They pretty much destroyed our Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, and were all set to invade the United States. Interestingly enough, the thing that stopped them apparently was that Admiral Yamamoto, a architect of the Pearl Harbor invasion, warned the Japanese general staff, said, no, I don't think we should invade America. Said they're armed, said we will face a gun behind every blade of grass, which is true. That's what's kept us free. And now look at these idiots that are saying, oh, give up your gun, we'll all be free. What idiots? I mean, all you do is look at Chicago. They got the toughest gun laws in the whole nation and the highest crime rate and the highest murder rate. Come on, folks. That's simple.
Yeah, well, a criminal's not going to generally give his gun back.
Of course not.
Yeah.
And they'll always be able to buy one on the black market. So it's only law-abiding people that they're trying to disarm. I heard a very disturbing story today about a veteran who had spinal problems because of his service and went to the VA, and they were trying to get him to do a bunch of stuff and take a bunch of medicine. All he was trying to do was just get his pension, his money, his payments. And they were trying to get him to go for psychiatric treatment. He said, I don't want to go to psychiatric treatment. He said, it's not my brain, it's my legs, He said, I don't want to go. So what happens? They raid his house and they take his gun. Folks, it's getting really serious, but everybody's, got their head in the sand. Well, it ain't going to happen to me, but it will. Because just like Pastor Neil Muller said over in Germany during World War II, he said, well, they came for the communists, but I wasn't a communist, so I didn't say anything. And they came for the trade unionists, but I wasn't a trade unionist, so I didn't say anything. Came for the Jews, I wasn't Jewish, so I didn't say anything. And then when it came for me, there was nobody to turn to.
One of your books, The Rise of the Fourth Reich, the secret societies that threaten to take over America, postulates that this is what's coming to America. Of course, when people think of Obama, they generally think of him as a socialist or left-wing.
See, again, that's divide and conquer and play both ends against the middle. Everybody knows the Nazis and the communists were bitter enemies. But what they don't understand is they were fighting over nuances of the same theology. Communism was simply an extreme form of socialism. The Nazis, the name Nazi in the German is an acronym for National Socialism. They were both socialist programs, and the reason that everybody wants socialism and they're pushing it is because, number one, it sounds good on paper. Hey, well, the public, all of us people, will own the means of production, the means of distribution, share in the profits. Oh, my God, that sounds so good. But the problem is it's never worked that way in the whole history of the world. Because any social program, no matter how benevolent it may be, requires central administration. You got to have one central place authority that says, okay, this goes here and that goes there, and we'll distribute this here and here. Okay? And once you have that central authority, then the street thugs, the tough guys, or the people with all the money, in the case of the United States, buy up the central authority, and they have total control. And this is what's happening. This is what happened in Russia. This is what happened in France at the time of the revolution. This is what's happened in Cuba. This is what happened in China. People don't know their history, so they don't understand it. It's the same thing. We have a corollary here in the United States. We think we live in a democracy, and everybody wants a democracy, and we're over in the Middle East fighting people over there and bombing them and droning them, to bring democracy. Well, wait a minute. We weren't given a democracy, nor do we truly want one. How can I say that? Well, because democracy, by definition, is ruled by the majority. And the classic example of a democracy in action is a lynch mob. We don't want that. That's not what we were given. We were given a democratic republic. So what's the difference? Well, lynch mob, the majority say lynch him, so you lynch him. In a democratic republic, you have to give him a fair trial, and you have to give him legal representation, and he gets to confront his accusers, and he gets to confront the evidence against him. And only then, if he's found guilty and maybe even gets an appeal, then you can lynch him, okay? But see, we're getting away from rule of law, and this brings us back to Obama. It just boggles my mind that this guy who has waged more unnecessary, preemptive, aggressive war against so many nations, more than George W. Bush, and he gets a Nobel Peace Prize. What the heck is that about? I don't get it. And he has systematically, through executive orders, effectively dismantled the Bill of Rights and the Constitution of the United States. What's that all about? Why can't people see it? They can't see it because, number one, he's a little bit charismatic. He's a nice-looking guy, and he speaks well. But the main thing is just like I saw on a man on the street interview the other day, these two black women, one of them finally pops off and says, well, I just voted for him because he's black. And unfortunately, that seems to be the case. What they don't understand is because, let's face it, there's a disproportionate number of black people who are below the poverty level, and they're getting taken for a ride, okay? And yet they are his constituency. They think he's the guy there that's going to save them. But what is he saving money? Is he even getting up and using the bully pulpit to say, hey, it's time that we tighten the belt and that we, quit living this extravagant, resource-depleting lifestyle? No. He sends his 13-year-old daughter off to an exotic place with all about how all of her friends and Secret Service agents and uses up millions of the taxpayers' money for that kind of nonsense. And, that's why he's probably off playing golf somewhere. I mean, it's just people, there is such a cutout between what is perceived and what is actually going on.
But that makes you a conspiracy theorist.
Oh, yeah.
If I Google your name, Jim, the name...
I'm a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah, what do you make of that label?
Well, okay. First off, let's talk about conspiracy. Conspiracy comes from the Latin word conspiri, which simply means to breathe together or to act in concert. And if you have two or more people that get a plan going, then that's a conspiracy, okay? If you and I plan for a surprise birthday party for Aunt Susie, that's a conspiracy. It's not necessarily bad, but that's people conspiring. So the idea that there's conspiracy is, that's a foregone conclusion. In fact, my motto is, if it's not an act of God, it's a conspiracy. And it's true. Accidents happen, but if anybody planned it that way, then it's a conspiracy. And plus, we've put mafia chieftains in jail for years under charges of conspiring, okay? So there's nothing untoward or unusual or about that. And that brings us to theory. And I would simply say, if you can prove something, it's no longer a theory. And everything I just said is provable. So it's not a theory. They use that as pejorative to just simply badmouth anyone who says something they don't like that goes against the official party line, then it must be a conspiracy theory. And unfortunately, too many people fall victim to this because they watch TV. And the TV, which is now under the total control of only 5 multinational corporations with interlocking directorships and ownerships, and they decide for us what we're going to think about and how we're going to think about it. And unfortunately for most people, if they don't see it on CNN or ABC or CBS, then it must be a conspiracy theory. But it's really not. There's a lot of factual matters that are far beyond theory that are not being presented in the controlled news media.
I'll bring up something to someone and they'll say, oh, that's conspiracy theory.
Yeah.
And you can see their mind just shuts off. It doesn't matter what you say, no matter how logical you are. They've already decided that whatever you're going to say is fantasy-based.
Exactly. And that's another one of my lines is, I don't believe that is not a valid argument. Okay? You can tell me I don't believe that all you want to, and that's okay, because I'll fight to the death for your right to believe any cockamamie thing you want to believe. But belief is not knowledge. Okay? And you cannot refute someone's logical, fact-supported argument by saying, I don't believe that.
Well, let's bring that back to your book, because I actually have a hard time believing that ancient aliens have guided the Illuminati or whatever to their positions of prominence. Your book, Ancient Aliens, do the global elite conceal them?
Well, again, it started off as a hypothesis, which I think if you read our occulted history, and I only go back as far as the Big Bang. Okay. So we go right back to the beginning, bring it forward, and I think that I should have been able, through the information I present, to clearly show to any objective, open-minded person that there is compelling, if not overwhelming, evidence of extraterrestrial life, not only on the Earth, but on some of the other bodies in our solar system. They go back millennia, and that there are sacred sites, relics, artifacts, anomalies all around the world that indicates there was probably advanced civilizations on this planet long before we had written history and long before we know anything about them. They've only come down to us as legends like Atlantis or Mu, and it's kept everybody off balance. And you have to understand that because of the Dark Ages and before the Age of Enlightenment and before the Industrial Revolution, communication travel was long and slow, and knowledge was very, very constricted. Most people know anything. One thing I found interesting was, we're all told that way back there everybody believed the world was flat. Well, that's not really true. There's always been the knowledge among the educated aristocratic types that the world was round. They all knew this. The church kept propagating the idea that the world was flat because they didn't want their parishioners to be traveling around and communicating with each other and leaving their control. So a lot of what we think we know, we don't know. And this is what I bring out in our occulted history, along with the fact that today bones, strange skulls, artifacts, early day computers like the Antikythera mechanism, these things are all known, but they're not widely publicized, and they're kept quiet because the ruling elite does not want us to know our true heritage. And they certainly don't want us to know about ancient extraterrestrial astronauts. And I think the reason is simply this, Russell. I don't think they really truly care if we know that there was ETs on this planet millennia ago and probably still visiting here. What they care about, though, is if we absolutely know for sure that these folks were here, then we'll know for absolutely sure that there's alternative technology. And this may upset their monopolies over petroleum and energy and communication and medicine and et cetera, et cetera. So that's why they want to keep us in the dark, so that we don't interfere with their profit line, because the two basic control mechanisms to keep the human population under control going all the way back has been first religion, and God told me to tell you how to live. And once that began to fade during the Age of Enlightenment with the invention of the printing press, and then everybody got to read the Bible and said, hey, wait a minute, the Bible doesn't necessarily say what the church said it said. That began to wane, and so today the control mechanism is finances. We're living under the golden rule. Whoever has the gold makes the rules.
But whoever has the drones might be making the rules.
But it's the same folks. Because who has the drones? The U.S. government. Who controls the U.S. government? The bankers and the people that loan it money. Russell, we in the United States, we owe in excess of $16 trillion. We are broke. We are a broke nation. How can I say that? Well, because if you'll think back to the banking collapse in 2008, they were calling banks that were broke because of their bad lending practices, and they were broke, but they were still in operation because they got government taxpayer bailouts. They were calling them zombie banks, okay, because they were dead but still going through the motion. Well, we are a zombie nation because we owe more than $16 trillion, And it's been estimated that if every man, woman, and child in the country sold off everything they've got, clothes, cars, homes, boats, TVs, everything, we couldn't come up with about $9 or $10 trillion. So we're broke, but we're still going through the motions. We're a zombie nation.
There's a book, Obama Zombies, by Jason Matera.
Oh, I hadn't heard of that. That's true.
It shows a bunch of zombies on the front, blindly worshiping Obama.
Exactly, because they think he has a brain. By the way, you heard about the vegetarian zombie?
No.
Yeah, he went around hollering, grains.
Okay. We have some audience questions here.
Okay.
So they're somewhat random. Did you know or hang out with Jack Ruby at his Dallas nightclub? Apparently there are online photos.
Yeah. I met Jack Ruby. We weren't buddies or anything. Actually, though, here's a good point. Since I do have a photograph of me dancing in Jack Ruby's club taken prior to the Kennedy assassination, I can prove I was there, and I could make up all kinds of stories, right?
Yeah.
Oh, listen to what Ruby told me. But I'm not, because I'm telling the truth. I just went there as a young college kid. That was the place to go, especially after hours. And yes, I met Jack Ruby, but to be honest with you, I was a young college guy, and I was more interested in the dancers, okay? No, it's true. I did meet Jack Ruby, and I was in his club, and I did have, in fact, I had my picture taken there with one of his dancers, Kathy Kay. And there was a young Jim Mars up on the stage with my pants legs rolled up doing so I remember we were doing the twist, which had just come out. That was the big fad at the time. I think Chubby Checker.
Did you have the beard then?
No. In fact, I had big dark horn rim glasses and no beard and a flat top or crew cut, and I looked like Buddy Holly.
By the way, Tom Selleck is to mustache as Jim Mars is to beard. That is a... Have you ever considered shaving your famous beard off?
No, heavens no. And because mainly, this is my wife's beard. Yeah, a long time ago, she said, I really like beards, why don't you grow one? And I said, well, I'll start growing one. I said, but if it starts itching and giving me a trouble, because I'm going to shave it off. And she said, okay. So I started growing one. It got a little bit itchy after about 2 weeks, but then it stopped, and I've had it ever since.
Yeah, there's that point where it itches. That's awful.
So wait a minute. So Jim Mars's beard is like Tom Selleck's mustache?
No, but it's as classic to the character.
Oh, it's classic to the character. Okay.
Next question would be, are you aware of any military time travel ops allied with ETs?
Yes, I am aware of them. Do I believe in that? That's in my HUF file. I have a file when I get some information or some particular story, and I go, huh. And so I put it in my HUF file until I can get more information. I have met Andy Basiago, who claims he was one of these people who participated in these time travel experiments.
Alfred Weber's buddy.
Yes, exactly. And there's so much out on the internet about all that, but when you track it all back, it all seems to come back to those two. I'm just waiting for more information to come in. Hey, stranger things have happened, so I'm not about to say that and be closed-minded and just say I don't believe that, but I have to see a little more, and especially now that they're claiming that Obama went with them. And that's when he found out he was going to be future president, and that's when they began to groom him to be president, which sounded really far out, and yet time travel aside, the evidence is very plain that Obama, Barack Hussein Obama, better known as Barry Suetoro, or, any number of other aliases, and he's using a invalid and illegal Social Security number that belonged to a dead guy up in the Northeast, and the fact that his mother worked for the Ford Foundation in Indonesia under the father of Timothy Geithner, who is now our Treasury Secretary, and that the Ford Foundation at that time was strongly suspected of being run by the CIA, in an effort to overthrow the Indonesian president, Sukarno. And so there's lots of information and lots of stuff out there that pretty well indicates that Obama is simply a creation of U.S. intelligence. This is why he won't allow anybody to look at his school records. He won't allow anybody to see his birth certificate's under controversy. Of course, they finally came up with one, but it was actually and easily proven to be a forgery. And the thing that still sticks in my mind is an interview with his grandmother in Kenya, who said, "Oh yeah, he was born right over there," and pointed to the hospital and said, "I was there." That's just about good enough for me. And so it's all very plain that he is a legend. Okay, a legend in intelligence parlance means that this is a whole identity that's been created. And I guess the key thing is his stint at Columbia University, because they finally, a Freedom of Information Act finally forced them to turn over some records, and it showed that Obama registered there as a foreign exchange student, okay, which means he was not a U.S. citizen. Now, to me, that's an easy one to figure out. Either he was not a U.S. citizen and got this on this foreign exchange program, which means he is not constitutionally qualified to be president of the United States, which makes everything in his administration illegal, or he wasn't a U.S. citizen, in which case he lied to get foreign exchange status in this university, which means he's a liar and basically a thief. And so we don't need that either.
Where should my audience go to learn more about the work of Jim Marrs?
Well, oddly enough, you go to jimmarrs.com, JIMMARRS, 2 R's and Mars.com. And you'll find archives going all the way back to 2000, 2001, in which, if you'll go back, this is the 10th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq. And if you'll go back and read my articles that I was posting, not all of them by me, but articles I was posting, comments I was making, I tried to tell people that we did not need to invade Iraq. And I was quoting, that wasn't just my conspiracy theory, that was our own weapons inspector at the time, Scott Ritter, who said that he doesn't have any weapons of mass destruction. And that was quoting the International Atomic Energy Agency, which said he doesn't have any weapons of mass destruction and he's not building a nuclear bomb that'll be ready in 6 weeks. In other words, everything we were told was a lie. And we now know it, but how many people are going to admit that they fell for it? That's like right now, I can recall when Richard Nixon was elected in 1972 by a landslide. And yet you try to find anybody today that'll admit voting for him. People are just kind of funny that way.
Any relation to Tex Marrs?
None that we know of, although it's interestingly enough.
You've both been on this program.
Yeah. Well, both write about the New World Order and both live in Texas and both named Mars, M-A-R-R-S. That's a little bit weird. And Tex called me a while back, and I'm going to be with him this summer over about July 3rd and 4th, I think, at a conference down in Austin. And so that ought to be pretty interesting.
Oh, wow. He's a great guy. Big fan.
Seems to be. I've spoken to him a few times on the phone. I've never actually met him in person.
Jim Marrs, it's been an honor to have you on the program.
Well, the honor's all mine, and I would simply hope that everyone listening out there, turn off the TV, start thinking for yourself, okay? Don't believe me, don't trust me. I'm not a preacher or politician, but listen to what I have to say, and then go check it out. And if you find out I'm telling you the truth, then you don't have to worry about whether you believe me or not. Then you'll know for yourself.
And pick up a copy of Our Occulted History, Do the Global Elite Conceal Ancient Aliens, and visit jimmarrs.com.